The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. Not at my house, at my mother-in-law's house. I only know this because Patricia Chen called me first. Dr. Patricia Chen was the geneticist whose laboratory had processed the test that Eleanor Washington had ordered in secret, using a cheek swab she had taken from my son Noah during a Sunday dinner 3 weeks earlier, while I was in the kitchen and my husband Marcus was in the backyard, and Eleanor was alone with my 11-year-old boy at the dining room table with a cotton swab she had told him was for a special grandma project. Noah had told me about it that evening. Casually, the way children report things that seem ordinary because a trusted adult presented them as ordinary. "Grandma swabbed my cheek today," he said. She said it was a secret between them. I had stood very still in our bedroom doorway. Then I had said, very carefully, "What kind of secret, baby?" He shrugged. "She just said she wanted to know more about our family. I didn't say anything else to Noah." But I had lain awake that night, understanding exactly what Eleanor Washington had done, and exactly why she had done it. She had been trying to prove for 12 years that Noah was not Marcus's son. And now she had sent his DNA to a laboratory to get the proof she believed she had been waiting for. What she did not know, what none of us knew on that Tuesday morning when Patricia Chen called me before the results reached Eleanor's mailbox, was that the test had found something, not what Eleanor was looking for. Something else entirely. Something that didn't belong to me or to Noah or to Marcus. Something that belonged to Eleanor Washington herself. A secret she had been carrying for longer than I had been alive. And in approximately 4 hours, when that envelope arrived at her front door, her entire carefully constructed world was going to begin to fall apart. I sat down at my kitchen table. I picked up the phone. Bloco 2, CTA Precoce. Before I tell you what was in that envelope, I need to ask you something. If you discovered that your mother-in-law had secretly swabbed your child's cheek at Sunday dinner, that she had sent your 11-year-old son's DNA to a laboratory without your knowledge or consent, trying to prove that your child wasn't your husband's, what would you do? Would you confront her immediately, call a lawyer, tell your husband and let him handle it? Or would you wait, the way I waited, for 4 hours on a Tuesday morning, knowing that an envelope was making its way to her front door that contained not the answer she had been looking for, but something she had never in her life expected to find? Tell me honestly in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story is already under your skin, if you have ever been the woman that someone spent years trying to prove wasn't enough, please like this video and subscribe to Still Waters. New stories arrive here regularly, and every one of them runs deeper than you expect. One more thing before we continue. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Because I have learned, telling stories like this one, that the people who need to hear them are never in just one place. They are everywhere, and they are waiting. So let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand what was in that envelope, you need to understand who Eleanor Washington was, and who she had decided 12 years before that Tuesday morning that I was not. My name is Dorothy Mae Washington. I was born Dorothy Mae Collins in 1980 in Greensboro, North Carolina, the second of 3 daughters in a family that was loud and warm and not particularly interested in appearances. My father drove a delivery truck for 30 years. My mother worked as a school librarian and believed, with the particular conviction of a woman who had spent her career surrounded by books, that reading was the closest thing to a superpower that an ordinary person could acquire without special circumstances. I grew up believing that too. I also grew up believing, in the uncomplicated way of a child raised in a home full of love, that the world was largely reasonable. That people, when you got down to it, wanted the same things: connection, respect, the ordinary dignities of being seen and valued for who you actually were rather than who someone else needed you to be. I was 32 years old before I met someone who fundamentally disagreed with that belief. Her name was Eleanor Washington. I met Marcus at a hospital fundraiser in Charlotte in the spring of 2009. He was there because his architecture firm had designed the new wing of the hospital and had been invited to the event as a courtesy. I was there because I had been a nurse at that hospital for 4 years, and attendance at the annual fundraiser was one of those professional obligations that existed somewhere between voluntary and expected. He was standing near the windows, looking slightly uncomfortable in the way that people who are good at physical things sometimes look uncomfortable at events that require only standing and talking. He was tall, with the particular quality of stillness that I have always found more interesting than its opposite. And he was holding a glass of wine he had barely touched and looking at the Charlotte skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows with the focused appreciation of someone who notices how things are built. I noticed that about him before I noticed anything else. We talked for 2 hours, not about the hospital or the fundraiser or any of the things people talk about at events like that when they are managing impressions. We talked about Charlotte, about architecture, about what it meant to build something intended to last. He asked about nursing with genuine curiosity, not the polite curiosity of someone filling conversational space, but the real kind that generates follow-up questions that couldn't have been prepared in advance. I liked him immediately. Not in a dramatic way. In the quiet way that sometimes matters more. The recognition of someone whose company makes the room feel different. We had dinner the following week, and the week after that. And 6 months later, when he told me he was in love with me in the particular direct way of a man who had thought carefully about what he wanted to say and had decided the simplest version was the truest one, I told him I was in love with him too. We were married in October of 2011 in a small ceremony in Charlotte with our families and closest friends. Eleanor Washington did not attend. I need to tell you about Eleanor, not to villainize her. I have spent 12 years trying to understand her rather than simply oppose her, and I think the understanding is more honest than the opposition. But I need to tell you who she was, because who she was is the only context in which what she did makes any sense. Eleanor Washington was 68 years old when the envelope arrived. She had been born in Atlanta in 1956, the only daughter of a family that had, by the standards of Black American life in that era, achieved something that was carefully and deliberately maintained. A professional father, a well-kept home in a respectable neighborhood, membership in the right church and the right social organizations, a name that meant something in the specific community where names like that mattered. She had married Harold Washington in 1974, a man whose family had similar standing, similar carefully maintained respectability, similar investment in the particular kind of social currency that comes from being known as the right kind of people in the right kind of circles. Harold had died of cancer 11 years ago. Marcus was their only child, and Marcus, in Eleanor's architecture of meaning, was not simply her son. He was the continuation of everything she had built her life around, the proof that the careful choices and maintained standards and deliberate social positioning of 2 generations had produced something worth producing, which meant that the woman Marcus married was not simply a daughter-in-law. She was a verdict on Eleanor, on her choices, on everything she had worked to build and maintain and pass forward. And Dorothy Mae Collins, with her delivery truck father and her school librarian mother and her Greensboro upbringing and her nursing career, was not the verdict Eleanor had imagined. I understood this, actually. Not immediately. It took several years and a therapist I trusted to help me articulate it clearly. But I understood it eventually. Eleanor's opposition to me was not personal in the way that opposition feels personal. It was structural. I represented something that didn't fit the architecture she had spent her life constructing, and her response to that was not cruelty exactly, but the particular intractability of someone defending something they have decided is worth defending at any cost. The cost, in this case, was her relationship with her son and her grandson. She had decided it was worth it. For 12 years she had decided that. The specific ways Eleanor expressed her opposition were rarely dramatic. She was too intelligent for drama. Drama leaves evidence and invites opposition. What Eleanor preferred was the kind of sustained, low-level pressure that is difficult to name and therefore difficult to address. The comment that could be interpreted 2 ways. The exclusion that could be attributed to oversight. The question that carried within it an assumption that you were required to either accept or challenge, and either response made you look like something you didn't want to look like. She questioned my parenting, not loudly, with concern. The kind of concern that wrapped its criticism in the language of care and therefore made the criticism impossible to object to without appearing defensive. She referenced Marcus's previous relationships, women she had clearly preferred, in contexts that seemed designed to make the reference feel natural rather than intentional. "Oh, Marcus, do you remember when you and Stephanie went to that restaurant?" In front of me, at dinner, with the particular casualness of someone who has calculated exactly how casual to be. She questioned Noah's behavior in ways that were specifically about me. "He's so energetic," she would say. "Was your family always like that?" "Your family, not our family. Your family. 12 years of your family." Marcus saw some of it. Not all of it. Eleanor was careful about what she let Marcus see, having understood early that overt opposition to his wife would produce opposition to her, and Eleanor was strategic in ways that most people are not patient enough to sustain. What Marcus saw was a mother who had difficulty with change and a wife who was understandably hurt by that difficulty. And he had spent 12 years trying to be the bridge between those two things, with the particular exhaustion of a man who loves two people who cannot find their way to each other. I had never asked Marcus to choose. That was important to me. Whatever Eleanor was, she was his mother. Whatever she had decided about me, she had not decided about him. And the love between them, complicated and freighted as it was real. I was not willing to be the reason that love was severed, but I also was not willing to disappear. And that, I think, was the core of what Eleanor couldn't forgive. Not who I was. The fact that I stayed. The DNA test was not the first thing Eleanor had tried. Over 12 years there had been other things. Questions asked of Marcus about the timeline of our relationship. Questions designed, I understood in retrospect, to establish whether Noah could have been conceived before Marcus and I were exclusive. Comments about Noah's appearance that were framed as observations but were weighted with something else. "He doesn't look much like Marcus, does he?" Said at Christmas dinner, 2016, with the particular lightness of someone placing a stone in a stream and watching to see if anyone notices. I had noticed. Marcus had noticed too, that time. He had said quietly and without drama, "Mom, that's enough." And Eleanor had smiled and changed the subject and filed away the information that this particular approach had a limit she hadn't expected. She adapted. That was the thing about Eleanor. She adapted. She was not a woman who repeated approaches that didn't work. She was a woman who gathered information and modified her strategy and waited for a better opening. The better opening came in the form of a Sunday dinner in September. Noah at the dining room table, Marcus in the backyard, Dorothy in the kitchen, and Eleanor with a cotton swab and 12 years of waiting for proof she had already decided existed. What Eleanor did not know, what she could not have known, because it was information that no living person had access to except the one who had been carrying it since before Marcus was born, was that the DNA test she had ordered to expose my secret was going to expose hers instead. Dr. Patricia Chen had called me that Tuesday morning because she had a legal and ethical obligation to notify the parents of the minor child whose DNA had been tested without parental consent before releasing the results to the party who had ordered the test. She had tried Eleanor first. No answer. She had then, through the laboratory's standard notification protocol, identified Marcus as Noah's father and contacted our household. I had answered. "Dorothy," Dr. Chen had said carefully, after identifying herself and explaining the situation. "The results of the test your mother-in-law ordered are being delivered to her address this morning. Before they arrive, I need to make you aware of something that the test revealed, something that I believe your family will want to understand before Eleanor Washington sees these results." I had sat down. "Tell me," I said. And she told me. And in the telling, in the quiet clinical language of a geneticist describing what a DNA test reveals when it is processed completely and correctly, I understood something that reoriented everything. The test had confirmed, without any ambiguity, that Noah was Marcus's biological son. Eleanor had been wrong. For 12 years, she had been wrong. But that was not the thing that Dr. Chen needed me to know before the envelope arrived. The thing she needed me to know was something else. Something the test had revealed about the Washington family's genetic profile that raised a question nobody had thought to ask. A question about Harold Washington, about whether Harold Washington was actually Marcus's biological father. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that phone call. The morning light moved across the floor. My coffee went cold. And I thought about Eleanor Washington, about 12 years of your family, and he doesn't look much like Marcus in cotton swabs at Sunday dinner. And I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something closer to grief. Because whatever Eleanor had done, whatever she had spent 12 years trying to prove, what was coming through her mailbox in approximately 3 hours was not the answer to the question she had been asking. It was the answer to a question she had never known to ask. And nobody, not even the woman who had made my life quietly and consistently difficult for 12 years, deserved to find that out alone. I picked up the phone. I called Marcus. And then I said something that surprised both of us. "We need to go to your mother's house," I said, "before the mail arrives." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Why?" he asked. "Because," I said, "what's in that envelope is going to change everything she thought she knew, and whatever she is to me," I paused, "she shouldn't be alone when she finds out." Another silence. Then Marcus said, "Dorothy." "Yes," I said. "Thank you," he said, and we got in the car. Bloco 4, Descobertas Silenciosas. We drove to Eleanor's house in 15 minutes. Not because it was 15 minutes away. It was closer to 25 under normal circumstances. But because Marcus drove the way people drive when they are processing something significant and the processing has taken over the part of the brain that monitors speed limits. I didn't say anything about the speed. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands in my lap and watched Charlotte move past the windows and thought about what Dr. Chen had told me and about what it meant and about the particular cruelty of information that arrives too late to change anything but early enough to change everything. Marcus hadn't said much since we'd gotten in the car. He had asked me once to tell him again exactly what Dr. Chen had said. I had told him again. He had nodded. Then he had driven. The silence between us was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have been married for 12 years and have learned that some things need to be sat with before they can be spoken about, and that sitting with them together is different from sitting with them alone in a way that matters even when no words are being exchanged. I reached over and put my hand on his arm. He didn't look at me, but he put his hand over mine, and we drove the rest of the way like that. Eleanor's house was a large colonial in a quiet neighborhood of Charlotte that Harold Washington had bought in 1982, and that Eleanor had maintained with the particular careful pride of a woman for whom the condition of her home was a direct expression of the condition of her life. The lawn was immaculate. The flower beds along the front walk were precisely edged. The windows were clean in the way that windows are clean when someone cleans them regularly rather than occasionally. Everything about the house said, "This is a person who does not let things go." We pulled into the driveway. Marcus sat for a moment with the engine off. "She doesn't know we're coming," he said. "No," I said. "How do you think she'll react?" I thought about Eleanor Washington, about 12 years of studied strategic opposition, about cotton swabs and Sunday dinners, and the particular patience of someone who has been building toward something for a very long time. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think she'll be alone when that envelope arrives. And whatever is in it, whatever she finds out, she shouldn't process it by herself." Marcus looked at me. "Dorothy," he said, "why are you doing this?" I considered the question. "Because Noah is her grandson," I said. "Whatever she did, whatever she was trying to prove, he is her grandson and she loves him. And what she's about to find out is going to shake everything she thought she knew about her own family. That's not something I would wish on anyone. Even her?" Marcus asked quietly. I met his eyes. "Even her," I said. He nodded once. We got out of the car. Eleanor answered the door on the second knock. She was dressed the way she was always dressed, precisely, without a hair out of place, in the manner of a woman for whom appearance was not vanity but discipline. She was wearing a pale blue blouse and pressed trousers and small pearl earrings that I had seen on her 100 times, and that I associated so completely with her that I sometimes thought of them as part of her face. When she saw us, Something moved through her expression very quickly. Surprise, because we were unannounced. Then something more careful, the managed neutrality she used when she needed to assess a situation before responding to it. "Marcus," she said. "Dorothy. This is unexpected." "Can we come in, Mom?" Marcus said. She stepped back from the door. We went inside. Eleanor's living room was as immaculate as her lawn. Everything in its place, everything chosen deliberately, everything communicating exactly what she intended it to communicate about who she was and what she valued and how she understood her place in the world. I sat on the couch. Marcus sat beside me. Eleanor sat across from us in the armchair she always sat in, the one positioned slightly higher than the rest of the furniture in a way that I had always thought was either coincidental or entirely intentional. She looked between us. "What's this about?" she asked. Marcus looked at me. I had thought, on the drive over, about how to begin this conversation. I had considered several approaches, direct, indirect, building context before arriving at the point. I had discarded all of them in favor of the only approach that seemed honest. "Eleanor," I said, "we need to talk about the DNA test." The room went very still. Eleanor's expression did not change, not immediately. She held it exactly where it was, with the practiced control of a woman who had spent decades ensuring that her face communicated what she intended it to communicate and nothing else. "I don't know what you mean," she said. I looked at her steadily. "Dr. Patricia Chen called me this morning," I said, "from the laboratory where you sent Noah's sample 3 weeks ago. She's required by law to notify the parents of a minor child before releasing test results. She notified me." A silence. Eleanor's expression held, but something behind it had changed. Something in the eyes. A very small, very controlled shift that I recognized as the expression of someone whose carefully constructed position has just been identified and who is determining whether to hold it or release it. She held it. "I see," she said. Her voice was completely even. "The results confirmed that Noah is Marcus's biological son," I said, "which I imagine is not the outcome you were expecting." Eleanor said nothing, but her hands, which had been resting in her lap with the particular deliberate stillness of her usual composure, moved slightly, just slightly. A small adjustment, fingers tightening against each other. I noticed. Marcus, I think, noticed too. "Mom," he said. His voice was quiet. "Why did you do it?" Eleanor looked at her son. Something passed through her expression. Not guilt, not exactly. Something older and more complicated than guilt. The expression of a person who has been doing something for a very long time and has developed a justification for it that feels true and is now being asked to produce that justification in a room where it will be examined by people who love her and will not accept anything less than the real thing. "I wanted to know," she said finally. "If Noah was Marcus's," Marcus said. "Yes. You thought Dorothy." "I thought," Eleanor said precisely, "that the timeline didn't add up. I had questions. I wanted answers." "You could have asked," Marcus said. Eleanor looked at him. "And if I had asked and been told there was nothing to worry about, would that have been sufficient? Would that have resolved anything?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "It would have been the truth," he said. Eleanor's expression shifted slightly. "Possibly," she said. The word landed with its full weight. "Possibly. 12 years of possibly." Marcus exhaled slowly. He ran a hand over his face in the way he did when he was managing something difficult without letting it manage him. I had seen that gesture 1,000 times. I loved it and hated it in equal measure because it meant he was in pain and being careful about it. "Mom," he said, "there's something else." Eleanor looked at him. "The test," I said carefully. "It confirmed Noah is Marcus's son, but it also revealed something else about the family's genetic profile, something that raised a question Dr. Chen felt we needed to be aware of before you saw the results." Eleanor was very still now. "What kind of question?" she asked. Her voice had changed. The evenness was still there, but something beneath it had shifted. A frequency change, subtle, the kind you hear in someone's voice when they are suddenly, involuntarily afraid. "A question about Marcus's paternity," I said. The silence that followed that sentence was the most complete silence I had ever experienced in a room with other people in it. Eleanor looked at me. Then she looked at Marcus. And in that look, in the movement of her eyes, from my face to her son's face, I saw something I had never seen in 12 years of knowing Eleanor Washington. I saw her composure leave her, not dramatically, not with tears or raised voices or any of the visible performances of emotion that Eleanor had always seemed constitutionally opposed to. It left quietly, the way it had always existed, with precision and control, but in reverse. Like watching something carefully constructed come apart in slow motion, each piece releasing in order until what was underneath was visible. What was underneath was a woman who was afraid. Not of us. Of the envelope that was, at this moment, making its way through Charlotte in a mail carrier's bag toward her front door. "Marcus," she said. His name in her mouth sounded different than it had ever sounded before, stripped of the composure that usually carried it. Just his name. Just her son. "Mom," he said. "I need to tell you something," she said. And Eleanor Washington, who had never in 12 years of my knowledge of her said anything she had not prepared to say, began to speak. She had been 22 years old. That was where she started. Not with an apology, not with a preamble, not with any of the framing that people use when they are about to say something difficult and want to control how it lands. She started with a fact. She had been 22 years old, and it was 1978, and she had been engaged to Harold Washington for 4 months when she met someone else. Not in a dramatic way. Not in the way of movies or stories where these things happen at the precise moment of maximum narrative convenience. In the ordinary way that things happen, at a social event, through mutual friends, in the course of a regular life that had not yet settled into its final shape. His name was James. She said the name the way you say the name of someone you have not said aloud in a very long time, carefully, as if testing whether it still fits in the mouth. She had loved Harold, she said. She wanted to be clear about that. Harold was a good man, and she had chosen him deliberately, and she had never regretted choosing him. But James, she said. She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't need to. The engagement continued. The relationship with James ended. The wedding happened in June of 1979, and in March of 1980, Marcus was born. She had done the mathematics, she said. She had done it then, and she had done it many times since. She knew the mathematics were ambiguous. She knew that Marcus could have been Harold's. She believed that he was. She had chosen to believe that he was, and had lived inside that belief for 44 years, because the alternative, the uncertainty, the question, was something she had decided she could not survive and could not inflict on Harold, and could not allow to become the defining fact of her family's life. So, she had made it not the defining fact. She had simply decided it was not true and had lived accordingly. "Eleanor," I said. She looked at me. "Does Marcus look like Harold?" I asked. A silence. Then, very quietly, "No," she said. "He never did." She looked at her son. Marcus was sitting completely still beside me. His face was doing several things at once. The processing of a person receiving information that reorganizes a significant portion of what they believed to be true about themselves and their origins. I could feel it in his stillness, the particular stillness of a man who is holding something very heavy, very carefully. I reached for his hand. He let me take it. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said. The words came out differently than I had ever heard words come out of her, without the management, without the precision. Just sorry, in the voice of a woman who had been carrying something for 44 years, and had just set it down in a room she hadn't chosen, and in front of people she hadn't planned to tell. Marcus looked at his mother for a long time. Then he said, "Does this change who you are to me?" Eleanor looked at him. "No," he said, answering his own question. "It doesn't. You're still my mother." Eleanor's composure, which had been returning in pieces since the moment she began to speak, stopped returning. She put her hand over her mouth. And for the first time in 12 years of knowing her, I watched Eleanor Washington cry, not elegantly, not with the composed grief that some people manage even in their most difficult moments, genuinely, messily, with the full weight of 44 years of carried silence releasing all at once in a room where her son was holding his wife's hand and the mail was coming up the front walk. I got up from the couch. I sat beside Eleanor in the armchair, not in it, beside it, on the arm of it, the way you sit when there isn't room, but you need to be close. I put my arm around her. She leaned into it. And the three of us sat there together in Eleanor's immaculate living room as the mail slot opened and the envelope slid through and landed on the floor of the front hallway with a sound so small it was almost nothing. Almost. Marcus picked up the envelope. He stood in the hallway for a moment with it in his hands. A standard white envelope, the kind that arrives every day in every mailbox, in every neighborhood in America, containing nothing more dramatic than paper and ink and the particular weight of information that has been processed and certified and sealed and sent through the ordinary machinery of the Postal Service without any awareness of what it would mean when it arrived. He brought it back into the living room. He sat down across from his mother. Eleanor had composed herself in the minutes since I had put my arm around her. Not completely, not in the way she usually composed herself, which was total and seamless, and left no evidence of what had come before. But enough. She was sitting upright again. Her hands were in her lap. Her eyes were still wet, but her voice, when she spoke, was approaching something like steadiness. "Is that it?" she asked. Marcus looked at the envelope. "Yes," he said. A silence. Then Eleanor said something I had not expected. "Open it," she said. "I want you to open it." Marcus looked at her. "Mom, please," she said. "I don't want to open it alone. She stopped. "I've been alone with this for 44 years. I don't want to open it alone." Marcus looked at me. I nodded. He opened the envelope. The report from Dr. Chen's laboratory was 4 pages long. The first page was administrative. Case number, date of processing, names of the samples submitted, laboratory certification information. The language of documentation, precise and neutral and entirely indifferent to the human situation it was describing. The second page was the primary finding. Noah James Washington, the report stated. Biological son of Marcus Harold Washington. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. Marcus read that line aloud. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she looked at me. I held her gaze. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because everything that needed to be said about 12 years of your family and he doesn't look much like Marcus and cotton swabs at Sunday dinner was present in that room without either of us having to name it. The accusation she had been building toward for 12 years had just been definitively, scientifically, irreversibly disproven. Noah was Marcus's son. I had never been anything other than what I had always said I was. Eleanor looked away first. Marcus turned to the third page. This was the page that contained the secondary finding, the one Dr. Chen had called to warn me about, the one that had sent us driving across Charlotte on a Tuesday morning to be present for something we hadn't been invited to. The laboratory's analysis, the report stated, identified genetic markers in the paternal line of the tested minor that are inconsistent with the genetic profile of the documented paternal grandfather. In plain terms, the DNA that Noah carried from Marcus did not match the DNA profile of Harold Washington's documented lineage. Marcus read it once, then he read it again. Then he set the pages down on the coffee table very carefully, the way you set something down when you need your hands to be empty in order to think. He looked at his mother. Eleanor was looking at the report. Not reading it, she couldn't read it from where she was sitting, but looking at it the way people look at things that contain information they already know and have been dreading seeing confirmed. "Mom," Marcus said. She looked up. "The report says—" He stopped. He started again. "The report says that my DNA doesn't match Grandpa Harold's lineage." "I know," Eleanor said. Her voice was very quiet. "So, Harold," Marcus began. "May not have been your biological father," Eleanor said. She said it the way you say things you have rehearsed, saying alone for 44 years, and are finally saying out loud for the first time, carefully, with the particular effort of someone making a word real by speaking it. Yes. Marcus was still. I watched his face. I had been watching his face for 12 years, across dinner tables and in hospital waiting rooms and on Sunday mornings and in the ordinary accumulated moments of a shared life. And I had learned to read it the way you learn to read something you love and study and return to. I watched him process this information in real time, the way information of this kind has to be processed, not all at once, but in pieces, each piece requiring its own moment of integration before the next one can be absorbed. He was not angry. That was the first thing I understood. Marcus Washington was not an angry man. He was a deliberate one, a careful one, a man who had spent his life building things meant to last and who understood instinctively that the most important structures were the ones whose foundations were true. And what he was doing right now, sitting in his mother's living room with a DNA report on the coffee table in front of him, was rebuilding his foundation in real time, piece by piece, with the quiet, concentrated effort of someone who knows the work is necessary and is not going to rush it. He looked at his mother for a long time. Then he said, "Did you love him?" Eleanor blinked. "Harold?" "James," Marcus said. The name in his mouth, the name of the man who might be his biological father, said by the possible son in the presence of the mother who had carried the secret for 44 years, landed in the room with a weight that I felt in my chest. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "I did." "Does he know?" Marcus asked. "About you. About the possibility." Eleanor shook her head. "He moved away in 1979, before the wedding. I never—" She stopped. "I never told him. I didn't know for certain, and I chose Harold. I chose our life. I chose to believe that he was Harold's," Marcus said. "Yes." Marcus nodded slowly. The room was very quiet. Outside Eleanor's front windows, the Charlotte morning was proceeding with the complete indifference of the world to the things that happen inside houses. A neighbor walking a dog, a car pulling out of a driveway, the ordinary texture of a Tuesday in a quiet neighborhood continuing without awareness that something irreversible was being understood 30 feet away. I watched Marcus. I watched him sit with something enormous and hold it without breaking and find, piece by piece, the shape of who he was going to be on the other side of it. Then he looked at me. And in the looking, in the specific way he looked at me across that coffee table in his mother's living room, I understood something that I will carry for the rest of my life. He was not looking at me for permission. He was not looking at me for instruction. He was looking at me the way people look at the person who is their fixed point when everything else is moving. The way you look at the thing that is still true when other things have stopped being true. I held his gaze. "I'm okay," I said. Not to reassure him that what was happening was okay. It was too large and too complicated for that word. But to tell him that I was here, that I was present, that whatever this meant and whatever came next, he was not processing it alone. He nodded. Then he turned back to his mother. "Mom," he said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it honestly." Eleanor straightened slightly. "Yes, the 12 years," he said. "The questions about Noah, the things you said about Dorothy, the way you—" He paused, choosing the word carefully, opposed her. Eleanor was very still. "Was any of it about Noah's paternity?" Marcus asked. "Were you questioning whether Noah was mine because somewhere underneath all of it, you were afraid that the pattern, that what you had done, might have repeated itself? That Dorothy might have done what you—" He stopped. Eleanor closed her eyes. The silence lasted a long time. Then she said, "I don't know." 3 words. Said with more honesty than anything else she had said that morning. I don't know. Not yes, not no. The real answer, the one that lived in the complicated territory between motivation and awareness, between what we do and what we understand about why we do it. I looked at Eleanor. I thought about 12 years of your family. I thought about the cotton swab. I thought about the drive across Charlotte and the arm I had put around her and the way she had leaned into it. And I thought about something my mother had told me once when I was young and had encountered someone who had treated me unkindly and couldn't understand why. Sometimes, my mother had said, people are hardest on the things in others that remind them of themselves. I hadn't fully understood that then. I understood it now. Marcus asked his mother if she wanted water. She said yes. He went to the kitchen to get it. And for a moment, in the particular silence of a room from which one person has briefly departed, Eleanor and I were alone together for the first time that morning. She looked at me. I looked at her. "Dorothy," she said. "Yes," I said. A pause, long enough that I thought she might not finish. Then, "I was wrong," she said, "about you. I was wrong for 12 years, and I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway, and I—" She stopped. "I don't have an explanation that's sufficient. I just have the truth." I looked at her. "The truth," I said carefully, "is a reasonable place to start." She held my gaze. "Is it enough?" she asked. I thought about Noah telling me about the secret grandma project. I thought about 12 years of your family. I thought about all the Sunday dinners and the Christmas mornings and the ordinary family gatherings that had been shadowed by what Eleanor had decided to believe about me. I thought about the drive across Charlotte, about the arm around her shoulders, about choosing to be here. "It's a beginning," I said. Eleanor nodded. Marcus came back with the water. He set it in front of his mother. He sat beside me. And the three of us sat together in Eleanor Washington's immaculate living room with the DNA report on the coffee table and the empty envelope on the floor of the hallway and the Charlotte morning continuing outside the windows, and we began, slowly, carefully, without any guarantee of where it would lead, the long work of telling each other the truth. Bloco 6. Aftermath, a reconstruction. We stayed at Eleanor's house until 2 in the afternoon. Not because there was a plan to stay that long, not because anyone had decided that 2 o'clock was the appropriate time to leave, but because the conversation that began in Eleanor's living room after Marcus came back with the water was the kind of conversation that doesn't have a natural stopping point. It has only the point at which the people in it have said enough of what needs to be said for that particular day and need to rest before the next layer can be reached. We talked about Harold. Marcus asked questions about his father that he had never thought to ask before, not because Harold had been absent or insufficient, but because the questions hadn't existed before today. What Harold had been like when Eleanor first met him, what their early years had been like. Whether Marcus had inherited things from Harold that Eleanor could identify now, looking back across 44 years with the particular clarity of someone who has just had their vision corrected. Eleanor answered everything, not defensively, not with the careful management that had characterized every conversation I had ever witnessed between her and Marcus, with the particular openness of someone who has been carrying a weight for so long that the setting down of it, even involuntary, even forced by circumstances rather than chosen, produces a physical relief that overrides the instinct for self-protection. She told Marcus that Harold had loved him completely and without reservation. She told him that Harold had been a good father in every way that mattered, and that whatever the biology said or didn't say, the relationship between them had been real, and the love had been real, and the 40 years they had shared before Harold's death had been real. Marcus listened to all of it. He cried once, briefly, not dramatically, not with the full release of someone whose grief has been waiting for an outlet, but with the quiet tears of a man absorbing something large and finding that his eyes have responded before his mind has given them permission. He wiped them quickly and did not draw attention to them, and I loved him for that in the way I loved all the small private dignities he carried without display. I held his hand throughout. Eleanor watched us. At one point, somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, she said something to me directly that I had not expected. "You didn't have to come today," she said. "I know," I said. "Why did you?" I had thought about this on the drive over and had arrived at an answer that felt true. Marcus needed to be here, I said, and Marcus needed me here. That was enough reason. Eleanor looked at me for a long moment. That's a very generous answer, she said. It's the true one, I replied. She nodded slowly. The afternoon light was changing in the living room, the particular shift that happens in the mid-afternoon when the sun has moved past its peak, and the quality of light in a room becomes something softer and more horizontal. I had sat in enough hospital rooms at enough hours of the day to notice the light without thinking about it. And I noticed it now as a kind of marking. The afternoon moving forward, the conversation moving forward, everything slowly and incrementally finding its new shape. Marcus called Noah from Eleanor's house that afternoon. Not to explain, Noah was 11, and the full complexity of what had happened in his grandmother's living room was not something that needed to be transmitted to him that Tuesday. But because Marcus wanted to hear his voice. Because sometimes, when something large happens, the thing you need most is the evidence of what you are still sure of. "Hey, Dad," Noah said, in the particular distracted tone of an 11-year-old who is doing something else and has answered the phone out of obligation. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said. "How was school?" "Fine." "Can I go to Tyler's later? Ask your mom when she gets home. She is home. She just got back." Marcus looked at me. "We're at Grandma Eleanor's," I mouthed. He smiled slightly. "Tell Mom I'll call her back," he told Noah. "Okay? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Marcus said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." A pause. The particular pause of an 11-year-old processing a parental sentiment that falls outside the normal conversational categories. "Okay," Noah said finally. "That's kind of weird, but okay." Marcus laughed. A real laugh. The kind that happens when something genuinely strikes you as funny rather than the social laugh that fills spaces. It happened in Eleanor's living room on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of one of the most difficult days of his adult life, and it was, in its way, the most hopeful sound I had heard all day. Eleanor smiled at the sound of it. A real smile. The first one I had seen from her that wasn't managing something. We left at 2. Marcus hugged his mother at the door, longer than usual, with the particular quality of an embrace that knows it means something different than it did the last time. Eleanor hugged him back. Then she looked at me. I had not expected what came next. She opened her arms. I stepped into them. It was brief, not warm in the way that warmth is effortless. It was the warmth of something being built, rather than something already existing, which is a different kind of warmth, but not a lesser one. She was smaller than I had always perceived her to be. Standing this close, with her arms around me, she felt like what she actually was, a 68-year-old woman who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just set it down. "Thank you for coming," she said against my shoulder. "Of course," I said. We stepped apart. She looked at me with the particular look of someone who is seeing something they have been looking at for 12 years and is noticing for the first time that what they were looking at was not what they thought. "I don't know that I deserve this," she said quietly. "Probably not," I said. She blinked slightly, surprised, I think, by the honesty. "But deserving isn't always the point," I added. "Sometimes the point is just what you do next." She held my gaze. Then she nodded. Once precisely. "Very, Eleanor." And we got in the car. Marcus didn't say anything for the first few minutes of the drive. I didn't either. We moved through Charlotte in the afternoon traffic, the city doing what cities do in the mid-afternoon, the particular busyness of a day in its second half, people moving between the morning's intentions and the evening's arrivals. Then Marcus said, "I don't know what to do with this." "I know," I said. "Harold was my father," he said. "Whatever the DNA says, he was my father." "Yes," I said, "but there's a man named James somewhere who might be my biological father and doesn't know I exist." "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Do I want to find that out?" I looked at him. "Do you?" He exhaled slowly. "I don't know. I don't know if it changes anything or if it just adds something." He paused. "I don't know if those are the same question." "They're not," I said. "But you don't have to decide today." He nodded. The traffic moved. Charlotte moved around us. And somewhere in the passage of the afternoon, with the city outside the windows and my husband beside me, and the particular weight and lightness of a day that had been both terrible and necessary, I felt something that I had been waiting to feel for 12 years. Not victory, not vindication. Something quieter and more durable than either of those things, the feeling of a door that has been closed for a very long time opening. Just slightly, just enough to let the air move through. Noah asked about Grandma Eleanor at dinner. He asked the way children ask about things that exist at the edge of their awareness, not urgently, not with the specific curiosity of someone who suspects something, but with the ordinary wondering of an 11-year-old who had noticed that his parents had been at his grandmother's house on a Tuesday and wanted to understand the shape of his world. "Is she okay?" he asked. "She's going to be okay," I said. He considered this. "Was she sick?" "Not sick," I said. "She just had a hard day." Noah accepted this with the pragmatic equanimity of a child who has learned that adults sometimes have hard days, and the appropriate response is acknowledgement rather than investigation. "Can we visit her this weekend?" he asked. Marcus looked at me across the table. I looked back at him. "Yes," I said. "I think she'd really like that." Noah nodded and returned to his dinner. And Marcus, across the table, reached over and put his hand briefly on mine. Not to communicate anything specific, not to mark a moment or make a point, but simply because the hand was there and the table was between us, and reaching across it was the thing that made sense. I turned my hand over, and we sat like that for the rest of dinner. Ordinary, real, ours. Eleanor called me 3 days later. Not Marcus. Me. The call came in the morning, the way her calls always came when she called at all, which had not been often, and never without a specific purpose. But this call was different from any she had made to me in 12 years because it did not have a purpose exactly. It was not managing anything or communicating anything or positioning anything. It was just a call. "Dorothy," she said when I answered. "Do you have a few minutes?" "Of course," I said. She talked for 20 minutes. About Harold, mostly. About a memory she had been thinking about since Tuesday. Something small and specific that had come back to her in the days since. A moment from the early years of her marriage that she had not thought about in decades and that had arrived now with the particular vividness that memories acquire when something shakes the ground they've been buried in. She told me the memory. I listened. At the end, she said, "I'm not sure why I wanted to tell you that." "Maybe," I said, "because you needed to tell someone who would understand why it matters." A pause. "Yes," she said. "I think that's it." We hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I put it down and went back to the ordinary business of the morning, the breakfast dishes, the work schedule, the list of things that needed to happen before noon. The architecture of a regular day continuing around and beneath and through everything that had changed and everything that hadn't. Eleanor called again the following week, and the week after that. Not every week, not with any formal regularity, but with the tentative, slightly awkward consistency of someone practicing something new that they are not yet sure they are doing correctly. I answered every time. Not because everything was resolved. Not because 12 years of your family had been fully accounted for, or the cotton swab had been forgiven in the clean, complete way that forgiveness is sometimes imagined to work, but because the door was open. And keeping it open, I had decided, was worth the effort it required. 3 months after the envelope arrived, Eleanor came to our house for Sunday dinner. Not because Marcus had asked her. Not because I had organized it or planned it or managed it into existence the way I had sometimes managed things in the past, when the gap between what was and what I hoped for felt too wide to cross without engineering. She called on a Friday evening and asked if she could come. Just like that. No preamble, no framing. No careful positioning of the request inside a context designed to make it easier to accept. Just Eleanor's voice on the phone, stripped of its usual architecture, asking a simple question. Would Sunday work? I said yes. She arrived at 6 with 2 things. The first was a sweet potato pie. She had never brought food to our house before. In 12 years of being Marcus's mother and Noah's grandmother, Eleanor Washington had arrived at our door with many things: opinions, observations, the particular weight of her presence and its judgments, but never food. Never the offering of something she had made with her own hands in her own kitchen for the specific purpose of placing it on our table. I looked at the pie when she handed it to me. Then I looked at her. She met my gaze with the expression she had been developing over the past 3 months. Something new, something that existed between the composed management of before and the raw openness of that Tuesday morning. Something in the middle, something that was still learning what it was. "My mother's recipe," she said. "I thought you might like it." "I would like it very much," I said. The second thing she brought was a photograph. She gave it to Marcus in the hallway, before we moved to the kitchen, in the private way of someone passing something that belongs specifically to one person and should be received without an audience. I saw it briefly as it changed hands. A photograph, old, slightly faded, the particular color palette of pictures taken in the late 1970s. A young woman and a man, somewhere outside, both of them caught in the middle of laughing at something. Eleanor, young, and a man I didn't recognize. Marcus looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he looked at his mother. "I thought you should have it," she said, "whatever you decide to do with it. It belongs to you more than it belongs to me." Marcus folded the photograph carefully and put it in his pocket. "Thank you," he said. Eleanor nodded once. Precisely. Very Eleanor. And we went into the kitchen. Noah had set the table. This was not something I had asked him to do. He had simply done it, in the slightly effortful way that 11-year-olds do things they have decided to do without being asked, moving the plates and glasses and silverware into approximate positions that communicated effort more than precision. "Grandma Eleanor," he said when she came into the kitchen. "I set the table." "I see that," Eleanor said. She looked at the table. The napkins were folded incorrectly. The forks were on the wrong side. One glass was noticeably closer to its plate than the others. Eleanor looked at all of this. Then she said, "It looks wonderful, Noah." And she meant it. I saw her mean it. Not performing warmth for the benefit of the room, not managing an impression. Genuinely looking at her grandson's imperfect table and finding it wonderful because he had said it and he was hers and she was here, and all of that, taken together, was enough. Noah beamed. He pulled out her chair with the exaggerated courtesy of a boy who has recently discovered that certain gestures produce positive responses in adults. Eleanor sat. She looked at me across the table. I looked back at her. Something passed between us that didn't need to be named and wouldn't have been improved by naming. 12 years, a cotton swab, a Tuesday morning, a door opening, and now this. A Sunday dinner in the house that Eleanor had never fully accepted as belonging to me, at a table set by the grandson she had tried to use against me, with a sweet potato pie she had made with her own hands sitting on my kitchen counter from her mother's recipe. Not everything resolved. Not everything forgiven in the clean, complete way that stories sometimes promise. But something real, something true, something that had been built, not despite everything that had happened, but somehow, improbably, because of it. After dinner, Noah asked Eleanor to help him with a school project. It was a family history project, the kind that elementary schools assign with the best intentions, and that produce, in families with complicated histories, a particular kind of reckoning that the assignment's designers did not anticipate. He needed to interview a family member about their life. He had chosen Eleanor. I don't know if he had chosen her deliberately, with some 11-year-old awareness of what that choice meant in the context of what had been happening in our family over the past 3 months, or whether he had chosen her simply because she was there, present at Sunday dinner, available in a way she hadn't always been available before. Either way, he had chosen her. Eleanor looked slightly surprised when he asked. Then she looked at Marcus. Marcus shrugged in the particular way that communicated. "This is your call, and I think you should say yes." She looked at Noah. "All right," she said. "What would you like to know?" They sat together at the kitchen table. My kitchen table, the one that Eleanor had sat at twice in 12 years, and that now had her grandson across from it with a school notebook and a pencil. And Noah asked her questions. About her childhood in Atlanta, about Harold, about what Charlotte was like when she first moved there, about what she was like at Noah's age. Eleanor answered everyone. Marcus and I cleaned up the kitchen and listened from nearby and did not interfere because there are moments that belong specifically to the people in them and that are diminished by the presence of witnesses. And this was one of them. At one point, I heard Eleanor laugh. Not the social laugh, the real one. I hadn't heard it before. It was lower than I expected. Warmer. It sounded like something returning to its proper place after a long time of being somewhere it didn't belong. Marcus found me later that evening on the back porch. The dinner was over, Eleanor had gone home, Noah was in bed. The Charlotte night was warm, and the neighborhood was doing what neighborhoods do at 9 on a Sunday evening. The particular quiet of a residential street settling into its nighttime self. He sat beside me. We didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Do you think she's changed?" I thought about the sweet potato pie, about the photograph, about the table that looked wonderful. "I think," I said carefully, "that she's trying to." He nodded. "Is that enough?" he asked. "For now," I said. "Trying is where it starts." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've been thinking about the photograph," he said. "What about it? Whether to look for him?" "James." He paused. "Whether I want to know." "And do you?" "I don't know yet," he said. "But I think—" He stopped. "I think the fact that I can consider it, that it doesn't feel like something I have to decide from a place of crisis. That's because of you." I looked at him. "How so?" I asked. "Because you went to her," he said, "on Tuesday, when you didn't have to, and you had every reason not to. You went to her and you put your arm around her and you made it possible for her to tell the truth. And if you hadn't done that—" He stopped. I don't know what today would have looked like. I thought about the drive across Charlotte, about the 15 minutes at a speed Marcus didn't notice, about sitting on the arm of Eleanor's chair. "She needed someone to be there," I said. "But it didn't have to be you," Marcus said. "No," I agreed. "It didn't." He looked at me. "Why was it you?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "Because Noah loves her," I said, "and because you love her. And because—" I paused. I think I understood something about her that I hadn't before. About why she did what she did. Not an excuse. Just an understanding. Marcus nodded slowly. "And understanding," he said. "Is that enough?" I thought about Eleanor's arms around me in her doorway. About "thank you for coming." About the door that was open now by however much it was open. "It's more than we had yesterday," I said. He reached over and took my hand. We sat on the back porch in the Charlotte night, the two of us, with the neighborhood quiet around us and the house behind us and everything that had happened and everything that was still happening and everything that was still to come, arranged in the particular way that life arranges itself when you are in the middle of it. Not clearly, not with resolution, but with the honest weight of something real. And that, I have learned, is enough. Not the absence of difficulty, not the guarantee of ease, just the weight of something real in your hands and the person beside you and the knowledge that you chose, when the choice was offered, to open the door. That was enough. That would always be enough. There is something that nobody tells you about the people who make your life difficult. They tell you to protect yourself. They tell you to set boundaries and maintain distance and prioritize your own peace. And all of that is true. All of that is necessary and right, and I would never argue against any of it. But nobody tells you about the other possibility, the one that exists in the rare and specific circumstances when the person who has been making your life difficult is carrying something they never intended you to see, when the opposition was never entirely about you. When the hardness that has been directed at you for years is the hardness of someone pressing against something in themselves that they don't know how to reach. Nobody tells you that sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is go to that person before the envelope arrives. I drove across Charlotte on a Tuesday morning to sit beside a woman who had spent 12 years trying to prove I wasn't enough. I drove there not because she deserved it, and not because I had forgiven everything, and not because the 12 years hadn't happened or hadn't cost me something real. I drove there because she was Noah's grandmother, because she was Marcus's mother, because the truth that was coming through her mailbox was going to land on her alone in that immaculate house. And I understood, in a way I hadn't expected to understand, that nobody should be alone when the thing they have been afraid of finally arrives. And in doing that, in making that choice that I had every reason not to make, something shifted. Not immediately, not completely, not in the clean, resolved way that we sometimes imagine healing works, but something shifted. A door opened. A woman who had never brought food to my house made a sweet potato pie from her mother's recipe and carried it to my kitchen. A grandmother sat at a table, set imperfectly by her grandson, and said it looked wonderful and meant it. An 11-year-old boy chose her, out of everyone available, to interview for his family history project. None of that was guaranteed. None of that was deserved in any straightforward accounting of what had been done and what response it merited. It happened because someone chose to open a door. And that someone was me. I am telling you this not to suggest that you should open every door. Not every door should be opened. Some situations require the boundary. Some people require the distance. Some chapters require the ending. But I am telling you that the choice, the real choice, the one that costs something and produces something, is always yours. Not theirs. Yours. The woman who spent 12 years opposing me did not get to decide what I did with what she had done. I decided. And what I decided changed the shape of my family in ways I am still discovering. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. I want to ask you something before we finish. If you had been the one to receive that call from Dr. Chen on a Tuesday morning, if you had known that the envelope was coming and that the person who had ordered what was inside it was about to face something alone that would rewrite everything she thought she knew, what would you have done? Would you have waited? Would you have let the envelope do what the envelope was going to do? Or would you have gotten in the car? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Not quickly, not selectively, everyone. Because the people who find their way to still waters are not people who want easy answers. They are people who understand that the most important questions don't have easy answers, and who are willing to sit with that complexity rather than look away from it. If that is you, if this story found something in you that recognized itself, please like this video and subscribe to Still Waters. New stories arrive here regularly. Stories about the things that happen inside families when nobody is performing for anyone. Stories about what people do when the choice is hard and the right answer isn't obvious and the only thing available is their own character. Those are the stories worth telling. And before you go, where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? I ask, because it still moves me. The distance a story can travel. The number of people in the number of places who know exactly what it feels like to be the woman in the room that someone spent years deciding wasn't enough. You were always enough. Still, waters run deep. Thank you for sitting with me in them.